Welcome to Misha Madness and Motivation Podcast. This podcast is for anyone wanting to evolve in every aspect of their life. Do you want to be better and live life to your fullest potential? Tune in with your host, blogger, entrepreneur, and beauty executive, Misha.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. Thank you all for tuning in. As I told you guys earlier this week, I am gonna be talking about substance abuse because not only is it a big thing for people that are my age, but back when I was in high school, the amount of kids that were using drugs, whether it had been pills or sipping cough syrup, smoking weed, cocaine, it's just so common. And I wanted to bring on an expert, someone who has been working in adolescent treatment and as well as psychiatric assessment and stabilization. So I'm going to bring on Richard Capriola. I'm so excited to have him join the podcast. He's going to share his advice and from a perspective of the treatment side, which I'm not sure too many people actually, I don't know personally anyone who that I know uses drugs and has an addiction issue that we ever go to seek out treatment. So I thought it would be very helpful to have him on just to see like what the options are for treatment, what to look for, and then also for any parents who have children and are wondering like, well, how can I tell if my child is a user? So without further ado, please welcome Richard. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Misha. It's a pleasure to be here with you. And thank you so much for hosting this session on such an important topic as adolescent substance abuse. So thank you very much.
Yes, absolutely. So I gave a short explanation of who you are and what you've done in your past, but could you just introduce yourself to everyone and give us a little bit of your background?
Yeah, certainly. I started in this field after a long career in education, and then I transitioned over into working at a mental health crisis center in central Illinois. And I noticed that a lot of the people who were coming from the hospitals into our crisis center had a substance abuse issue. So I went back to the University of Illinois and obtained a training in addictions and was offered a position after that at Menninger Clinic in Houston, Texas. Menninger Clinic is a large psychiatric hospital that serves adults and adolescents from around the world. And I was hired to be an addictions counselor there. And I worked with many families and many adolescents and
From all over.
And so many times, Misha, I would sit across from a family and I would go through their child's history of using a substance and give them the diagnosis that their child had what we call a substance use disorder. And they would look across at me and they would say, I had no idea this was going on. Or
Right.
if they did suspect their child was using a substance, they might say, I sort of knew something was going on, but I didn't know it was this bad. And these were good parents. These are very good parents doing the best job that they could do. They missed the warning signs because nobody told them what to look for. They didn't know what to look for. So after I left Menninger, I retired a little over a year ago. I wrote this book, The Addicted Child, A Parent's Guide to Adolescent Substance Abuse. I kept it to about 100 pages because I know parents don't have a lot of time to read volumes of information. I kept the short chapters very short, but I packed it with a lot of information, hopefully that a parent can read and walk away from with the sense of, I got this. I feel better about this. I hope I don't have to deal with it, but if I do, I feel better prepared.
Yes, absolutely. Your book is super packed with a lot of information and it's not overwhelming the amount of information. It's very structured and the way that you break everything down of how to tell, what to look for, different types of treatments. You even break down the different types of drugs and what to look for per drug, per drug use. So I thought that was really helpful. But what drugs are young adults taking now that is different from past generations in the past?
Well, kids are still attracted to alcohol and marijuana. Those are the two primary substances that teens are attracted to, and that's been true for a long, long time. But
Yes.
what has changed in the last few years that is somewhat alarming is the tremendous increase in what is known as vaping, where they will take a substance like nicotine or marijuana, they'll put it into an instrument, looks like a pen, and it turns it into a vapor that they inhale. Well, in the last 3 years, there has been a dramatic increase in the number of high school students who have turned to vaping nicotine and marijuana. It's rather alarming how quickly that is growing.
Yes. And from what I understand, it is very addicting. It's just as like the nicotine. They say that it's supposed to be not as bad as cigarettes or any other nicotine product, but I don't see that to be true. And then you see all the truth commercials, telling us that it's not.
Well, it is in some respects it's different than tobacco because with tobacco you get hundreds of other chemicals in with the tobacco. With nicotine, the kids are vaping pure nicotine, which means they're getting higher concentrations of nicotine, which makes it more addictive quicker.
Wow. I did not know that. So thank you for sharing that. In your book, you recommend mental assessments when learning that someone is using drugs. Why
Yeah.
is that?
I have a chapter in my book that guides parents along the lines of what assessments should I get done? What tests should I get done if I suspect my child has been using a substance? Certainly, you'll need an addictions assessment. That's what I was doing so that you get the full information on your child's substance use. But I also recommend a psychological or a neuropsychological assessment to either rule in or rule out whether or not your child might have some underlying emotional issues that you didn't know about. Many of the children that I worked with, many of the teens that I worked with at Menninger Clinic who were smoking marijuana, when I asked them to help me understand why they were using so much marijuana, the number one answer that came back was it helps me with my anxiety. So for some kids, not all kids, but for some kids, there may be an underlying psychological reason as to why their child is using a substance to medicate an intolerable thought, an intolerable feeling or memory. So as a parent, you want to get that psychological or neuropsychological assessment done so you can rule in or rule out whether or not any of those issues are present.
Yes, and speaking about marijuana, because now, especially now, I'm in New Jersey, so it just became legal not too long ago here in New Jersey. So everyone is like, oh, well, it's just a plant and it's legal now, so it can't be that harmful. But what are the real effects of cannabis on the brain?
Well, the difference is that in states where marijuana is legal, it's legal for adults. It's not legal
Right,
for adolescents. And
where
there's
their
a good
brain's still
and there's
developing.
a good reason exactly, and that's the primary reason is that the adolescent brain is in the process of maturing and developing those circuits and those connections that are going to be so important when that child becomes an adult. Our brains don't become fully developed until around age 24, 25. So it's very important that parents protect their child's brain. So the big difference is that, what may be okay for adults because their brains are fully developed and they have less risk of doing damage is not okay for adolescents whose brains are very young and in the process of developing and forming.
And what about because 21 in New Jersey is good to buy cannabis,
Yeah.
and at that point you're still not fully developed, but isn't there still a greater chance if the use is very heavy?
Yes, the use is very heavy. Even as an adult, you run the risk of affecting things like your short-term memory, your concentration, the processing speed of your brain, and your motivation. Especially as you point out, if the use moves to somebody who's using daily or multiple times a day.
Yes. And I just wanted to ask, just to be clear for even adults that think, oh, well, I'm fully developed, and they may not have even known that the brain doesn't develop fully until 24, 25. but
Yeah.
I did see that you put in your book, and I thought it was awesome. You're like, cannabis does affect your brain. And if you don't know, if you haven't had an assessment already on your mental state, then the heavy use of cannabis can then push you, or any drug for that matter, can then, it'll be like a split of, now you have neurological issues, or if you have pre-existing like schizophrenia or paranoia in your family, the heavy use of drugs, you may not be paranoid, but now you are, and now you're hallucinating.
That's a very excellent point, Misha, because there have been cases where a person, an adult, has a history of schizophrenia or some paranoid delusions and thought disorders. Maybe not themselves, but it's in their genetics, it's in their family history. And using marijuana as an adult, for anyone who has a history of schizophrenia or genetic predisposition to it, is like playing Russian roulette with your brain. I don't know when the gun's going to go off, but I'm pretty sure it probably will. So people who have any type of thought disorder, schizophrenia, paranoia, they absolutely should stay away from any use of marijuana because it can trigger those events.
Yes. And how can someone be supportive to a friend who has just revealed that they recently relapsed?
I think the issue in relapse, relapse among people who use drugs is treated by society different than people who relapse to a medical condition. If you have a person who has diabetes and they relapse, if you have a friend who has cancer and they relapse, society looks upon them with compassion. But
Yes.
a drug addict who relapses, society looks at it completely different. They almost look at it as a failure on the part of the person, a moral failure. And that's
Yes.
true for drug use too.
Yes.
We, as a society, we look at people who use drugs different than people who have other types of diseases. But the way that I look at a relapse, whether it's an adolescent or an adult, is that a person can turn a relapse into a learning experience if they choose to. They can look at what were the triggers that caused the relapse, what was going on, what was happening in their lives, and they can examine that and use that relapse as a learning experience, not a failure, but a learning experience. And if they can do that with the help and support of friends and family, then the chances of them relapsing again become significantly less if they can use it as a learning experience. It's not a failure. It can be a learning experience.
Yes, and I know it's especially hard for family and friends who get intertwined and so invested in the rehabilitation of a person.
Yeah.
Um, and I can speak from experience because both of my parents struggle with drug abuse. So I can remember times in my life where a parent was doing really good and then they were relapse, and it just feels like, oh, I was rooting for you and I really thought that you had it this time. And like you said, it's like almost putting more pressure on them to go and use again when you tell them, hey man, I'm disappointed in you, I thought
Yeah.
you were going to do better.
Yeah.
So yes.
Because that's focusing on it being a failure, not a learning experience. And if no one wants to be treated like they're a failure, because that's just going to knock them down more, and they're going to figure, well, I might as well just keep using. Instead, what we want to do is work with them and help them use it as a learning experience. What caused the relapse? What was going on? What were the triggers that are there? And turn that into a learning experience so that the likelihood of them relapsing again becomes much less.
Yes. Can we talk about getting to the point of being clean? You put in your book that sometimes like legal intervention or like family pressure is what's needed to push someone in the direction of going to get help.
Yeah.
And why do you feel that? Do you, because I read that and I was like, well, maybe people might feel like, oh my goodness, I hate this person. Like they're not helping me, because when you're so consumed in your drug use, you're like, man, I'm not hurting anyone but myself. I just want to do this and whatever.
Well, let me say two things. First of all, when it comes to the adolescent population, I never met an adolescent who wanted to go into treatment. You
Right.
know, they would come into the hospital yelling and screaming and arguing and bargaining and pleading and crying, and then they would settle down. And I saw that over a period of days and weeks, they gradually got involved in the treatment, and some of them, quite a few of them, quite honestly, made some remarkable progress.
Mm,
But the message to parents is, you need to hold the line. You need to insist. This is not going to be the first time your child told you no. So you're used to your child telling you no. So when they say no to going to get an assessment, or they say no going to treatment, then you just have to stand firm and insist that it be done.
yes.
Um, and the other part about mandated treatment, the
Mhm.
research shows that mandated treatment works. You did not have to be voluntarily, hopping and skipping and happy to go to treatment. You can go into treatment, very much opposed to it. Mandated treatment works. And we know that from the results that come from the court system, where
Yeah,
individuals have been mandated to go to treatment. We've seen the outcomes and the research on those individuals, and we know that mandated required treatment works. So if that's the only way to get your loved one into treatment, then by all means take that route.
for sure. And how can someone tell, if someone is showing signs of like a substance use disorder? What are the symptoms of
Yeah,
that?
that's really one of the most important issues that I put into my book. How do parents recognize the warning signs? So I have warning signs for a child that might be drinking alcohol. I have warning signs for a child that might be using marijuana, because they can be different. I have warning signs for a child that might be self-harming themselves or developing an
Yes,
eating disorder, because sometimes they accompany a child using a substance. Um, so it's important to know what the warning signs are, and I put those in my book. As a general rule, what I recommend parents do is pay attention to the changes you see in your child. You know your child better than anyone. So pay attention to the changes that you see that are going on. Don't assume that they're just normal adolescent acting out behaviors. They might be
sure.
that, but that might be a warning sign that there's something else going on. So pay attention to those changes. If they last a day or two or a short period of time, it's probably not too concerning. But if they tend to linger on and on and on, and then you start to see more than one warning sign, then I think it's time to be concerned. So here's some examples: would be a child whose grades are starting to decline. Why are they declining? A child who might be getting into trouble at school, disciplinary action at school. What's going on? A child who used to participate in sports no longer wants to participate or enjoy sports. A child that used to be very outgoing and social and verbal now becomes very quiet and secretive. A child who used to introduce you to their friends, you knew who their friends were, you might have even known who their family members were, now becomes very secretive of who their friends are. So these are example of some general warning signs that parents need to pick up on. And like I say, if they last a short period of time, probably not too concerning. But if they linger on, and then you start to see two and three and more of these warning signs, then I think it's a red flag, and you need to be concerned.
For sure. And then that's when a parent can start to assess their child
Yeah,
further.
yeah, and get the assessments done so that you get a better understanding of what's going on.
Yes. You also, in your book has so much information. Like you said, you share the symptoms to look for, what to look out for each drug, even alcohol, even inhalants,
Yeah.
because there are children, in grade school who might sniff their markers or glue or what have you. And you also touch on being addicted to cell phones, which is it just fits perfectly in the time that we're in today.
Yeah.
Um, could you share with anyone listening who has a child that is old enough to use a device, a cell phone, how can a parent tell if their child is even addicted to their device?
Well, I think it's cell phones. It's also social media like TikTok and
Yes.
Facebook, and there are some alarming statistics that came out from a Facebook research that was revealed about how teenagers, especially teenage girls, are getting such low opinions of themselves by being on things like TikTok because the images there are so unreal. These girls are looking at these images and comparing themselves to them and feeling horrible about it afterwards.
Yes.
So these social media devices like Facebook and TikTok. Kids use TikTok a lot more than Facebook,
Yes.
um, um, and the cell phone usage can become what we call a process disorder. The chemical disorders are alcohol and drug. The process disorders are more behavioral, but they have the same effect on the brain. They still give that rush of pleasure,
Okay.
um, and they can become compulsive. And if you've watched a teenager, I've got two granddaughters that are
Mhm.
teenagers, and it's like they're glued to their cell phones and constantly on some type of social media site, and that can cause a conflict with parents. So my advice to parents is number one, be aware of what applications your child is getting into, monitor them, get their passwords, set limits on the times that they can use, and probably most importantly, have a conversation with your child about what's
Yes.
appropriate and inappropriate on social media. Let them know that some things are just not appropriate. Negative contact, negative comments, degrading people, insulting people, and let them know that many of the images that they see, especially that girls see, although it affects boys too,
Yes.
but much more so girls, that these images are not necessarily real. They're made up.
Yes.
And
Photoshopped, or,
yes,
they
right.
went to under the knife at the doctor to get it a certain way, that social media body that is
And
now very popular.
and teenage girls are comparing themselves to that, and then they feel they don't measure up,
It's
and then they start
unrealistic.
unrealistic, and they start to feel depressed, and then that sort of spirals. So parents need to be aware of this, and they need to monitor their child's use, and they need to have some discussions about what's appropriate and what's inappropriate on social media.
For sure. I absolutely agree. 100%. Do you feel that recovery is like a lifelong process? Like once someone goes through the treatment that they're, it's like a thing that they're going to have to keep trying at? And if so, what do you suggest for anyone listening who has gone through treatment and is struggling to continue to live drug free?
I think recovery, depending on the extent of the addiction, is a lifelong endeavor. It gets easier the more you work at it and the longer you go. It gets easier the more strong and supportive system that you have around you, family and friends. But it does require work. It just doesn't happen automatically. When you come out of treatment, you'll be very vulnerable. And throughout your recovery, which hopefully will last years, there will still be temptations and times when you feel that it becomes almost too much. And that's the importance of having a support group. Maybe it's a AA meeting, maybe it's some other 12-step group meeting, maybe it's just some close friends and family as a support group. But you will need a support group around you, especially in the beginning, but hopefully throughout your recovery. And then as time goes on and you become more successful, I think that helps build confidence. But
Yes.
probably the best thing to have is a good support system. It doesn't have to be large. It can be one or two good friends, somebody that knows you, somebody that you have confidence in, somebody that can be there for you at the times when you feel most vulnerable.
Do you think that it's more, I don't want to say likely, but is it more realistic to have your support group be a family or friend, or is it more realistic to for someone to search like an NA or an AA type of meeting where those like there's counselors there and different advisors who they specialize in that type of treatment or just getting you through recovery, and then also maybe so that you don't put the pressure on your family, or how do you feel about that?
I think the majority, probably a large percentage of people who are in recovery rely on a support system that is 12-step based. It's AA meetings, it's NA meetings, it's smart recovery, which is not 12-step based. But it puts you in a context of being around people who have gone through similar situations than you have. It gives you an opportunity to go to groups. You could go to, in some areas like the Houston area, you could go to a 12-step meeting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So it puts you in contact with people who have gone through many of the same experiences that you have. And I think to a certain extent, that may be more supportive than even family can be, because it gives you a place to voice your concerns and your vulnerabilities around people who will protect your confidentiality, and in many cases have gone through what you're experiencing. So I think in some cases that can be more powerful than even family, but you want to have family there for you too, but perhaps in a different role.
Yes. Well, your book, The Addicted Child: A Parent's Guide to Adolescent Substance Abuse, is available on Amazon.
It is available on Amazon. It is available as a Kindle for people who like to read on their Kindle. It's also available as a paperback for people who want to just keep it as a resource and refer to it, which is what I would recommend. Even if your child is 6 or 7 or preteen, you want to learn this information as soon as you can so that you feel prepared and more confident to deal with it if you have to. Um, so it is available on Amazon. It's also available through the book's website, which is helptheaddictedchild.com, www.helptheaddictedchild.com. If you go to the website, you can review endorsements and reviews, a sample chapter. There'll be a link that'll take you directly to Amazon where you can order either the Kindle version or the paperback version.
Awesome. And I will also be leaving the links down below, and as well as the website.
Great.
Do you still counsel?
I haven't done that since I left Menninger a little over a year ago.
Oh, okay.
Most of my time has been devoted to, first of all, writing this book, and then reaching out to people like yourself that have been very kind and very gracious to help me reach out to others to get the word out about this resource.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I just want to thank you so much, because it was really a pleasure to have you on. And I know that this episode is going to be helpful for parents, for even people who are themselves struggling. I hope that it can motivate them to just go get the help or look to someone else for the help. And to also get your book, because like I said, it is jam packed. There's so much information. And the way that you wrote it is it's like you wrote it with the intention to teach, so it's easy to learn from this book.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Appreciate your time and your interview, and I appreciate your questions and helping me to reach out to people because this is an important issue. So thank you, Misha. Thank you
No
very much.
problem. Thank you so much for being here. All right. Bye. All right, guys. Well, I hope you all enjoyed today's episode. I will leave all of the links down below for you guys to grab his book. His name is Richard Capriola. The name of the book is The Addicted Child: A Parent's Guide to Adolescent Substance Abuse. All right, guys. Well, I will check in with you all on Monday with Mondays with Mish.